Alright, how's everybody doing? This is the Comic Samurai. I want to welcome you to my next video. And tonight, we're going to be looking at my favorite comic book covers done by the great Neal Adams. Let's go ahead and jump right in. First up, we got this Amazing Adventures number 7. And I love his take on Black Bolt there. What a dynamic image that is. Now, I'm just going to be showing my favorites here. It's definitely not an all-inclusive list. But next up, we got Amazing Adventures number 8. And again, he did a great image of Black Bolt using his voice against Thor. And I just love the idea of those two superheroes going at it. They don't fight very often, and this is a great image done by Neal Adams. You can't ask for much more. Next up, we got Avengers number 96, and his take on the Vision there. I just loved the colors and his perspective. That's one thing that you'll find in a lot of Neal Adams' work, is he has a unique perspective a lot of the times, and this one is a beautiful example. Next up, we got Avengers Finale. And this one kind of wrapped up that Avengers volume that they were on, but it's got a Neal Adams cover featuring Ant-Man there. And I don't know if I like this one or not, but I do remember seeing it and picking it up because of Neal Adams' art. Next up, we got Batman number 237. And this is one of the most iconic covers that I'm going to show. And it features that character, the Reaper, there. And I just love the red background on this. It's one of the spookier, fun Halloween covers that I've got, and I always feature it at that time of year. It's a beautiful Neal Adams cover. Next up, we got Batman number 244, and this is probably my favorite cover that features Ra's al Ghul. I loved that villain, and he and Batman had such a great dichotomy. They were such great characters that played off of one another. Now, Ra's al Ghul wasn't necessarily a villain. His motivations were always just against Batman's, and this is a great image there. Next up, we got Batman Odyssey number 1, and when this one came out, I thought, oh, Neal Adams back on the Dark Knight. I can't wait to see it. And when I read this, I was like, oh, somebody should have stepped in and said, Neal, maybe you need some help with the writing, because God bless him. He's one of my favorite artists, but that Odyssey was his. He wrote it, and it was just hard for me to follow. I couldn't get into it. It wasn't for me, but I loved looking at the art. So if you want to pick up some good and cheap Neal Adams art, you might check out that Odyssey title just for the art. And it's summed up in this cover here. Look at how he uses that image of the face there, but it's really a crouching Robin inside of a cave there. But it does look like the Riddler's visage. I do like how Neal Adams does that. My all-time favorite Neal Adams uses a trick and employs a trick a lot like that. Next up, we got Brave and the Bold, number 81 here. And I always liked when the Flash and Batman teamed up. It's fun to see Superman and the Flash, but what a weird mix the Dark Knight and the Scarlet Speedster have got to have when they team up. That's a beautiful one with the colors. I love that green background. Next up, we got Brave and the Bold, number 85. And I argued that this is the comic that ended the Silver Age. When Neal Adams redid Green Arrow's look, it ushered in a new era of comic books, and this is my choice for the end of the Silver Age. Next up, we got Brave and the Bold, number 86. And when Neal Adams went on to do the character of Deadman, he kind of made that character his own. And this is a great start for them. I love how Deadman and Batman played off of each other there. That grayish background there, it caught your eye. I gotta hand it to him. Next up, we got Brave and the Bold, number 93, and this is one of my favorites here. I loved this story, but it's a great cover here with a little bit of humor also, with the finger beckoning the Dark Knight to enter the House of Mystery. Next up, we got Challengers of the Unknown, number 74, and this one also has an appearance by a Deadman there, but it was kind of a weird story where he had a guest appearance, but he didn't really interact with the characters, but it is a great kind of possession cover there. Neal Adams liked that spooky stuff, and I think we're all happy that he added his flavor to the horror comics. Next up, we got Conan, number 37, and I think his strongest suit was when he went on the muscle-bound characters, a lot like Conan and that sword and sorcery thing. I mean, look at how he drew that wizard in the background there, and these evil, like slug-like monsters there with a damsel in distress. This has got to be in my top 3 Neal Adams covers. I love that one. Next up is Crazy Man #1, put out by Continuity. And this one had a die-cut edge where it traced the edge of Crazy Man's face there. And this is another one that you got to be a little crazy to read. The story's a little convoluted, but that beautiful Neal Adams art makes it worthwhile. Next up we got Deadman #1, and this is a newer one that had an embossment on it and a glaze and glow in the dark, and it's a tough one for me to get into. It's a gimmick Neal Adams cover, and it's the only one that I know of that employs that brash of a gimmick. Next up we got DC Special #29, and this is the only instance that I can think of where Neal Adams drew Hitler on the cover of a comic book there, and it does have that imagery there that is a little controversial, but it's a beautiful image of all those superheroes fighting in World War II, and it's a great Neal Adams cover. I like that one. Next up we got Detective Comics #395, and this is probably, I would argue, where Neal Adams got his most notoriety. It was from drawing Batman. This is a beautiful image here. I think it's the first one that Neal Adams teamed up with the writer of Dennis O'Neil, or Denny O'Neil, and they did many very impactful comics, those two, and this was their first, and I would argue it's their best. I love that story. What a beautiful, haunting cover here. It's awesome. That sums up Neal Adams' magic. Next up, we got Detective Comics #400, and this is another one of the iconic covers that Neal did. And I'm just going to try to show a little more of the lesser-known ones, but this one that introduced for the first time that character of Man-Bat there was amazing, with the city below them and those two towering figures. It's a beautiful cover. Next up we got Detective Comics #402, and I would argue that this one is a better cover than that issue #400. I like the atmosphere, the colors, and the placement of the figures on the cover here with that moon in the background and that lantern better than issue #400. I love this cover, and I think it's the most underrated Neal Adams cover. It just always gets outshined by that issue #400. Next up we got issue #404. This one featured that enemy Ace character that's usually done by Kubert, so it's shocking to see Neal Adams do that character. But the red background here, the Dark Knight flying through the air, it's a beautiful dynamic image, and it's one of my favorites. Next up we got Detective Comics #407, and this one played on that trope that there's usually a villain breaking up a marriage of a superhero, but on this one, Man-Bat's getting married and Batman's breaking in on the wedding there. I love that image of Man-Bat carrying his bride. It's a beautiful one, and Neal Adams is the master. Next up we got Detective Comics #408. Now this story involved one that was rejected by editors, and Neal Adams had to come in and advocate for it, and he got this one printed. It's a beautiful cover. I love how it tells a story across the panels there, and then has that spotlight of light. But my favorite aspect of this cover is that cape that flows out from Batman in a circle there. It's like it actually has weight to it, and I love that. All right, next up we got Detective Comics #410, and I think this one is the best story that Neal Adams ever worked on. Not my favorite cover, just because of the pink there, and this is one I would love to see fixed with a different coloring on it, but it's a great story of all these circus performers there. They have to team up with the world's greatest detective to solve the case in this one, and that's always fun for me. Next up we got the first X-Men #1, and this was Neal Adams' take on Wolverine, and I gotta say, it's not my favorite. I did not enjoy his take on Wolverine. I didn't like how he drew his claws or his hair. In my opinion, he should stick to Batman, Superman, and the earlier X-Men. I loved his take on the first team of X-Men, Beast, Cyclops, Jean Grey, and all that. But Wolverine, it did not pass mustard for me. Next up, we got First X-Men #2, and this is another example. Something about the way he drew his hair and his claws. I just don't think it was a good fit, and God bless him. I love experiencing Neal Adams' take on Wolverine. It just wasn't for me. Next up, we got Green Lantern #80, and this is another series that Neal Adams is very well known for working on. And I kind of like this take on the cover that was supposed to look like a newspaper reprint there. And they kind of used that printing technique, so it looks like an image printed on newsprint. It caught your eye, and it definitely stood out. It's beautiful. That's what Neal Adams' art reminds me a lot of time, is of a photograph. Next up we got Green Lantern #86, and everybody's seen the more famous of the Green Lantern one. I think this one is always overshadowed by 85, so I wanted to show this one, the second part of the drug series, where Speedy, which is Green Arrow's sidekick, is a heroin addict there. But look at all the faces in the background there that Neal Adams drew. Love that they used the red ink with the blue syringe there. Everything on this cover works, and it's a classic. Next up, we got Green Lantern number 87. This is where that third Green Lantern of John Stewart is introduced. I love the fact that he didn't wear a mask. I love the fact that he's an African American. I love the fact that it's a white background on this cover. It's a beautiful image. This is one of my favorite Neal Adams covers. I love that. Next up, we got Green Lantern number 89. Now, this was kind of a controversial one because it had a Christ-like figure being crucified on the cover there. But he got creative with it. He's not on a cross. He's being strung up on the wing of a jet plane there. There's the jet engine behind him there. And you've got Green Arrow, Green Lantern in the foreground. I love those covers where you've got a foreground, a background, and a midground, too. This was a beautiful one. That orange background gets it. Next up, we got Green Lantern, Green Arrow Classic. And this is the one that reprints that 85 and 86 of Green Lantern. But they got a new cover here, and it's a new image. And I got to say, I do not like the technique that they used to color this one. They should have stuck with what they used to do, how they used to apply colors, because that airbrushing, digital type early coloring, I don't think was a good fit for Neal Adams' beautiful work. Next up, we got Heroes Against Hunger number 1. It's a special, put out by DC Comics. Now, Marvel had a comic a lot like this that aided with famine relief in Africa called Heroes for Hope. But this Heroes for Hunger features the DC characters, and they chose Neal Adams to do the cover on this one, and I think it's just as good as Art Adams' version that he did for Marvel. But what a beautiful image there of Superman and Lex Luthor on the cover. Next up, we got House of Mystery, number 186. And I mentioned earlier that Neal Adams likes to do those horror-type comic books. And this is an example of that House of Mystery, with that Pan character playing his flute there, and those children there, and that one little, like, imp there with the hooves on him. Oh, it's creepy, and the kid's unaware. There's a sense of irony and foreboding in this one with that blue wash, beautiful cover, underrated in my opinion. Next up, we got Justice League of America, number 74. And this one, I don't know why all of the professionals and the experts don't talk about this one. It doesn't get nearly enough attention, in my opinion. The Silver Age and Golden Age Superman going at it with the Justice League cheering them on in the background there. You don't know which is which, who to root for. I love the idea of those two Superman battling on the cover there, and I'm so glad that they got Neal Adams to do it. Next up, we got Justice League of America, number 82. And this one is another one where the Silver Age and Gold Age, or Earth 2, Earth 1 characters meet each other. And you can see there's the Golden Age Flash, Silver Age, and they have the counterparts. And I love how what's happening to the figures in the background is reflected in the characters in the foreground there. Neal Adams did another great job on that one. Next up, we got Justice League of America, number 91. And this one features Batman carrying a fallen Flash there. It's very reminiscent of so many covers where one is carrying a fallen hero there. But he's flanked by other heroes. And look at the faces on the side there. I wish they would have used Neal Adams images on all of those faces. But it is a beautiful central image done by the great Neal Adams. Next up, we got Megalith, number 1. And there was a time where Neal Adams worked for this Continuity Comics there. One of the characters that he did with this Megalith, and the art, a lot of it was handled by Mark Teixeira, and then Neal Adams also contributed to it. And when those two teamed together, I thought they were such a good fit. They were like peas and carrots. Beautiful art on that one. Next up, we got Mr. T and the T-Force, number 1, and Neal Adams did the cover on this one, and what a cash grab gimmick. They had a card in it. It was bagged. Mr. T. And his popularity was definitely waning when this came out. I remember seeing it like, oh, I don't think this one's going to fly. But Neal Adams, it drew me in. I paid my money. Next up, we got Miss Mystic, number 1. And this is another bagged comic, another continuity one that Neal did. But the image of that pterodactyl in the background is beautiful. But this one, it employs that trick of the magic eye where you relax your vision and you let it double up and then a 3D image appears. And this one is just the female body of this character that rises up in 3D. What a great idea. I wish they'd do creative stuff like that more. Next up, we got Phantom Stranger number 4, and I would argue that this is another one that could have been the end of the Silver Age. This one had a reimagining of the Phantom Stranger, a lot like Neal Adams did with Green Arrow. But those colors on this one, that white that rises into yellow, and then orange, and that energy bursting into the corner there. I love this one, underrated, great Neal Adams cover. Next up, we got Strange Adventures, number 209. And I'm going to show a couple of these. I don't like all of them, but this is a great one. A different perspective, the purple background, that great big blue back facing you. And it was odd to see the back of your character so prevalent, and he's upside down. With that Ferris wheel at an odd angle, this one is a dynamic, different cover than what I had ever seen before. Next up, we got Strange Adventures number 210, and this is another one where Neal was just trying some new ideas here. And you get the image of the claw here with his prosthetic arm, and look at how they inked the figure of Deadman a little different, where it's a gray tone instead of black. Beautiful, genius cover. Next up, we got Strange Adventures number 211, and I had to show this one because it was experimental for Neal, I believe, but it didn't work for me as well. That white silhouette, it really was wanting, I thought. I don't know if he was rushed on this or really was trying to experiment. But this is one I had to show because I don't think it worked very well. Next up, we got Strange Adventures number 212. And again, he got that real close image of the characters back there, but you can see the expression on their face, and there's a great story being told in the background there, and I love that. This point of impact with the swiping claw, beautiful cover, love this one. Next up, we got Strange Adventures number 213. And again, this is one where the background was so interesting. I could just look there and see if there's hidden images all day. You've got that prone figure there, and then you've got Deadman's face. It's a beautiful cover, and Neal Adams really was scratching an itch on this one. Next up, we got Strange Adventures number 214. And look at that technique, where they draw the figure in different flips and forms as he moves across the panel. In this case, the panel is the entire page. But I love that, where you've got the same character drawn, moving through time and space there. The headlights on the car, this figure in the foreground in peril. Love it. Neal Adams did that unlike anybody else. Strange Adventures number 215 is next, and this is the one where it finally has a confrontation between Deadman, the guy who killed Deadman, and this is where Neal Adams kind of tried to wrap things up. Beautiful green cover there. Love this one. It's great. Next up, we got Strange Adventures number 216. And this one did end Neal Adams' run with Deadman on this title of Strange Adventures. Love the hands on this one. I'm a sucker for hand covers. That green ray down there. And there's another third hand holding the figure of Deadman. Beautiful, genius cover. Next up, we got Strange Adventures number 217. And this is a Neal Adams image on the cover here, but this is where they switched to featuring Adam Strange instead of Deadman. And I just wanted to show the transition here. This is a beautiful image. I love that center image there, flying at the reader, beautiful colors, awesome cover. All right, moving on to Superman number 207. Now, this is an earlier Neal Adams work there, and you can see his take on all these villains there on the side. It's another very symmetric cover there with that image of Superman, his 30th anniversary. I love when they have a date on it too, so you can see like, oh, I remember when Superman was only 30 years old. That's fun. Next up, we got Superman number 243. And this is definitely in my top 5 favorite Neal Adams images. Just the two figures in the center of the image there with a white background. I'm a sucker for that when it works, and never in history has a white cover worked like this. I love it. You can't see anything else but the passion, the romance of the embrace on the cover here. Neal Adams, he was a king of that kind of cover. Next up, we got Superman number 307. I have to contrast that with this one that didn't really work for me. Something about his position of Supergirl's legs there and the crashing of the bottle. It's like there were supposed to be 7 million people in there. That city would be a lot smaller if it had a population of 7 million. I guess kids didn't really know what 7 million meant. But the image of Superman there was just so too. This is the most mediocre of his covers, in my opinion. Next up, we got Tales of the Green Hornet number 1. And this was a Now comic that Neal Adams did. And it features that Green Hornet there and Kato. I had to get it just to see his take on Kato, which I think was a more popular character than the Green Hornet. The coloring on this one was a bit of that digital airbrushing again. I don't know if it worked, but it is an interesting image done by Neal Adams. Next up we got Valeria #1, and this was put out by Windjammer, or Acclaim. It was kind of an offshoot of Valiant, I think. I did like the coloring on this one with that blue and the underlighting of that Valeria character, but I think Neal Adams had a lot bigger plans for this character. I think she only had 2 issues before they went defunct, but this is a great cover, kind of trying to do a different pose there. A little risque for Neal Adams, but it was a fun one. Next up we got Valiant Vision Starter Kit #1, and this is the only instance I could find where Neal Adams did a cover for Valiant comics. And this one was sold with the Valiant Vision glasses there, and you opened it up and it was kind of explained how to use it and everything. They really tried to use the color, but those goggles, they really do a number on you, and it is a different version of 3D that I think worked very well. But this is a Neal Adams image, and I love it. He worked for Valiant. Next up, we got The Witching Hour #8. And Neal Adams had a knack for humor also. I think he did pretty good when he tried to do that. And in this one, this woman's trying to get into the room, and all these monsters there with this maid there. It's a classic earlier humor cover, and I thought it worked pretty good. Next up, we got Witching Hour #13. And this one is probably my second favorite Neal Adams cover. I think it is absolutely brilliant. The coloring on this one, where you've got that central figure, that face, yelling, and you're like, in horror, screaming, and you see that, oh, it's a spider there, but look at the spider. It's got a little skull head. It is creepy. This one had to have jumped off the shelves when it was with those other comics that were done in such a classic way. This one was new, it was exciting, and Neal Adams loved to push the envelope like that. Next up, we got World's Finest #175. Now this one, that orange background, tan there, it rarely works for me, but I think it did on this one. It's another one of those covers where it's kind of a reflection down the middle there. You've got these 2 figures reflected on the sides there, Superman, Batman. Works for me, an interesting comic, compels you to read it. Next up, we got World's Finest #176. Now this one, the color again jumps out at me. That red background there. The black silhouette of the figure. Another very symmetric cover there. He liked that. My one demerit is the green and the pink in the trade dress. Didn't care for that, but I think this is another underrated cover. Next up, we got World's Finest #178. Now this one was Neal Adams' take on the old costume of Green Arrow there. And it's kind of a hokey Batman too, but that image of Superman, I do like that one. This is a fun cover that introduced this new character that was really just Superman in disguise and a robot at times, I think. But it was a fun Neal Adams one. Next up, we got World's Finest #258, and this image. Oh, I did like that one. It's interesting to figure out what is going on with Batman, like turning into a bat, attacking Superman. And look at the way Superman's arms were drawn there. I love this one. Interesting. I do kind of wish that the image would have extended to the top of the cover, but I'll take what I can get. Next up, we got The Zero Patrol #1, another continuity comics, and I would love to see the story of why he got into continuity. What happened? What was the draw? I think it was a cash grab, but who knows? I mean, it was kind of an interesting story, and beautiful Neal Adams art here, but that cover's pretty good. I'm going to show the second issue of that one too. I think this is a more dynamic cover than the first one. I love that kind of barbarian image there. You've got to see how does that, the sword and sorcery aspect, fit with this science fiction title. Next up, we got Savage Tales #5. And this is a magazine-sized comic book, but it's got a beautiful cover done by Neal Adams. This is one of my favorites. Another one of the few images he did of Conan, but you also get Khazar and his saber-toothed tiger. I believe it's Zabu there on the cover. But look at the mist, the coloring on this one. Beautiful Neal Adams at his best. All right, now before I show you my favorite Neal Adams cover, I wanted to show you this Comic Book Profiles #3 from 1988. If you want a good interview and just article done on Neal Adams with other creators talking about him and a lot of examples of his work, pick that one up. And another one that I recommend even more is this Comic Book Marketplace #40. It's got beautiful color reproductions of a lot of his work with interviews of other creators there, and it just spotlights Neal Adams in a way that he deserves. All right, my all-time favorite Neal Adams cover is this All-Star Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder #8 Retailer Incentive cover. And I just love that image of Batman and the Joker, where you can choose to see the Batman or the Joker there. And I love the way it was colored with that red in the trade dress there. And just the way that he incorporated two images into one. I could look at this one more than any other comic book cover in my collection. And Neal Adams claims the prize as the most interesting comic book cover in my collection. Well, thank you for joining me tonight. Let me know if there's any other creators that you want me to spotlight. But thanks again, and have a great night.